Here we go. Here we go. Welcome to Back to School with Esports U. I am your guest. Oh, wait, I'm your host. I've got a great guest, but I'm your host, Bubba Gaddert. Thanks so much for being here. We're on twitch.tv/esportsu, and I got an amazing guest. I've got someone who's kind of set the standard, not kind of, but has set the standard for what's happening in the Scholastic Esports space, what is happening in the college space, and really in many spaces that we're going to learn about today. You're gonna hear from an expert who has been in this industry for a long time, and we're gonna bring him right now. Mike Moog Aguilar, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you, Bubba?
I'm wonderful. I'm wonderful. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
And I'll take the time anytime for conversations like this. I look forward to this day.
Well, I first off the bat, I'm not wearing any orange, but yes, I went to Oklahoma State, and I had plenty of good times at OU when I worked in athletics, and I worked with the student athletes. We went down. We had a lot. It was always good to have conversations because the student athletes never bickered and fought like fans did about the Bedlam rivalry. The student athletes just like, I gotta eat, and I gotta go to study hall, and I gotta practice. But yeah, it's been fun to watch you since I've come into the space a couple years ago and see what you've done. But I want to dive into who you are and what you do, and I want to go back. I want to go back to you were in the Army National Guard. Is that right, in Fort Sill?
Yeah. So I served active duty for 2 years and then went guard. 3 months before 9/11 is when I enlisted. So I graduated class of 2000 and then decided to do the college route and failed miserably and decided to say, I can't just sit idle, got to do something. And enlisted, and then the world went upside down for us. And the fortunate and both unfortunate, as I'll call it, it's kind of a mixed bag, is I never deployed. So I would definitely not call myself combat veteran or anything like that, as I have high respects for those that have seen wartime and where the metal hits the meat, as we say. But definitely had those scares ramping up to it. But at the time you're talking about 18 years, 19 years old, and you feel invincible still, and you have the vitality. Your hips don't hurt the way they do at now 40 for me, and that you're just ready to go and attack, and you see loss of life and things like this. It's
Wow.
It just rings right in your soul that you need to go and contribute or find some way to support taking care of our countrymen.
I love it, man. Well, thank you for your service. It's very much appreciated. We do some stuff with the Army National Guard. I don't know if you know uh, Sergeant Flores, who's a part of the Army National Guard Esports. I do a couple interviews with him a year, and I don't know. You definitely love to. If you don't know him, he's pretty amazing.
I actually kind of here we go. Here's how this works. I actually need an introduction for that.
There we go.
We have an Oklahoma student who from another school district I met this last weekend who's going guard and is a top performer in esports, but wants to do some other things beside the college track and has been looking for ways to get involved in esports or something with the guard. So that would be a really cool connection.
Yeah. He's part of this Esports U group. We do stuff with NJCAA and their esports division, and we talk about a lot of stuff. And then he let me play some Warzone last summer or fall and just get destroyed. They carried me. Let's just say they carried me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're in the military. Did you attend college? Where'd you attend college?
So I actually started at Cameron in Lawton, Oklahoma, which is where Fort Sill is based. And my dad was a professor there after serving 20 years in the military himself. And my mom was a speech therapist for the Lawton Public Schools. And so that's what sets the tone for a lot of my academic initiatives and the passion I have for educators and this sector. I just never dreamed that it would be esports how I did it. But that was instilled in me from a very age. I'm a third generation academic, third generation veteran. As my grandfather served in World War II, Purple Heart recipient. Grandfathers on both sides, and both my grandmother, several aunts and uncles are also public school teachers as well in Texas. So like the educator blood is definitely within our veins and in our household culture and our heritage. And so that was really critical. But I went to Cameron, failed miserably, joined the military, had that whole scare, did the whole thing in my mid-20s where I didn't know quite what I wanted to do, hadn't found myself, and then Katrina hit. So at this time we're in guard, and again didn't go anywhere, but became very real very fast. And so as that came down, then the urgency of border patrol and things like this came up as well for the guard across the nation. And then finally, my time was coming up for reenlistment, I just said, you know what, I think I'm ready to get my stuff together. And I actually, as I was finishing out my military career, or my time in the Guard, which I wouldn't call that necessarily career in that way, just because that's that week in the month, type thing. It's not that taxing in timeline. But as I was closing out that chapter of enlistment, I actually started going to University of Phoenix, which is hilarious because we all went to distance learning models over the last 3 years. So I'll just call myself a little progressive in that. And the thing there is that, so my dad was an officer in the military, where I enlisted. My dad did logistics and stuff. So we were in like West Germany when the wall was still up in the 80s.
Whoa!
And
Wow.
he was the executive officer at Frankfurt during times like Chernobyl and that era before Reagan had the walls, requested the walls be ripped down. And so we came back to the States as part of that decommissioning from President Reagan and the de-escalation in that part of the world. And um, having that background of always being mindful of surroundings and logistics and thinking of it in a logical stance from what he would teach me also has played its part in building this for OU, and abroad. So the University of Phoenix stuff ended up being kind of like a due process part, because there's plenty of people that have negative feedback about University of Phoenix, paper mill, things like this, and sure,
Right.
and I'm not going to argue them actually, but it's still accredited, and those things still mattered. And at the time, it made the most sense for how I wanted to approach this based on what I was doing and starting my career. I started to work in local government. I worked for the juvenile facility here in Oklahoma County, and that also gave me another perspective of also what has helped me build OU in regards to public servants and what resources we don't have for youth in need and at-risk youth, and oftentimes, not exclusively, but oftentimes, taxpayers, when we have penny cent raises or tax raises, will often respond with their wallet saying, why am I going to pay for youth programming when I'm just going to have to pay for them in the adult systems anyway?
Wow.
So
Wow.
we're not great at
Yeah, a lot of
proactive programs.
reactiveness, right?
Right. And
Jeez.
so that was very in my face. That job gave me shingles at 27 because there were certain things. We're talking about the Obama administration, and at that time we have the Obama Prison Rape Elimination Act, which is the actual name of it. And that was echoing through any detention facility across the nation, where we were trying to improve the standards and quality of life of inmates, because just because they've committed crimes and things like this and they're serving their time doesn't mean that they should be susceptible to just unregulated violence and fights and things like this, as they are paying their debts to society as ruled by our justice system. So in a youth environment, it's even more critical because, one, you have youth from that are developed at 18, and you have youth that are not,
Right.
17. And so we had instances of youth that got put into comas from fights that would break out. And I had a project put onto me by the director. At this time, I'm in IT. I'm doing mostly just tech support work and a little bit of project management
At OU.
Yeah, no, this is at Oklahoma County.
Oh, okay.
And this project was to help deal with accountability because we had a youth that got severely injured and almost lost his life in our care. And the idea is that prior to this time, as they would do bed checks on a 15-minute interval, hour intervals, they would just be doing that with pencil and paper, meaning that you could just go in there and fill all of it. It's no real state of accountability for our own workforce and the accountability to the courts and just taxpayers. So the system was to make this digital wands that's unique to the individual detention officer. So they'd have to go and actually touch each door physically with this wand for accountability.
I've seen those, yeah.
And yeah, so we were deploying that. And unfortunately, they wanted to accelerate the program so fast before I had trialed it and vetted it out and make it, have as many redundancies in place so that we could protect it. But they decided, instead of like doing this kind of hybrid role of the old style system and the new style system, they dove right into the new style system. My problem with that is that these detention officers, who are also underpaid, this would be their livelihood, because if we don't have accountability of them doing their job and keeping tabs on our tenants, our residents, then somebody's got to pay that price.
Yeah.
And something happens, it's even more so. So that gave me shingles as I transitioned out of Oklahoma County.
Wow.
It put a really deep fire into focusing on things that can benefit at-risk youth,
right,
and preemptive programs.
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely see that. I never went to the Oklahoma County. Was it the juvenile system?
Yeah, juvenile facilities right next to Chesapeake Energy.
Up in Sand Springs, we spent a couple. Every year we went there to do some team building with their students, or with the students there, because and it was part of their Phoenix program. If they were allowed, if they were in that program, and they were doing well, they could come out and do team building with our OSU. And actually, we took some OU football players there as well. A lot of fun, man. Good. Thank you for what you do there, because that's definitely needed. And I know we rank pretty rough in Oklahoma and here in Kansas rough. And Missouri. Yeah. So I love that. So you were at Oklahoma County. When did you go to OU in 2013? Is that right?
In 13, I did. Mm-hmm. So that was 2008, 2011. In between there, I worked for Apple at the end of Steve Jobs' era and the birth of iCloud, that generation.
Oh, wow.
And so that helped me get out of my shell of the predominant introverted nature that we have in the gaming industry and gaming, for the most part. So that was like, I call it my time of, it was about almost 3 years of speed dating. Because when you're doing tech support in an Apple store, especially during an iPhone launch, or you can imagine the time when iCloud went live before it even existed, like what that was like, people just not knowing stuff syncing and working in the way they're supposed to work. And so every 10 to 15 minutes or 30 minutes, I would meet a new person, and I'd have to break down their body language, diffuse any situations of conflict, take ownership of the issue, and help re-educate how to resolve it or fix it and find the solution. That is definitely tough, is a definite skill set. So that was a life learned, but it also made me catapult out of the introverted nature into at least a little bit more functional introverted nature. And I like people genuinely. It's just that social awkwardness in regards to interacting with them, breaking ice, especially from different backgrounds or different ideologies or anything like that. That's a challenge. But when it's right in front of your face, it allows you to understand the power of diversity when embraced properly, and you make yourself vulnerable to the idea that your way is not the only way.
Love it. So you were doing tech at OU, and was it 2016? Is that right, when you started doing more gaming and esports?
Yeah, so 2016, November 10th, I'll never forget this day. The CIO of IT at the time had come back from an Amazon summit and literally asked the words, "What the hell is Twitch?" And this started everything. At this point, my direct report, my boss, who I still love today, amazing boss, Miller Latimer, shout out to you, came back with this question. He said, "Do you want this?" And I said, "Oh yeah, hold my G Fuel, let's go." And I would have never dreamed, because it's one of those things that for a lot of times up into this last kind of 5 to 6 years of collegiate scholastic development, more mainstream acceptance in this topic, where we kind of hid that about ourselves more and more. It's like, oh, he's that gamer, he's that weird guy that just spends his time online all the time. And I always attributed, as I started to teach in the last couple of years, one of the first questions I asked students, or regardless of them being traditional or non-traditional, is, when did you start embracing, or have you started embracing the fact that you play video games openly?
Yeah.
And the question is definitely split. It's a very polarizing question. And most people are like, you know what? I've never even thought about it. But yeah, I don't share this with other people. Or it's the other one. It's like, yeah, my parents played games with me growing up. And you can just tell the different support structures that we had, where if we talked about traditional sports, it tends to have a higher percentage of acceptance in general because of societal buy-in and mainstream acceptance. But so 2016 kicked it off for me, and it was an R&D year.
Right. And then it became more. Before we jump deeper into that, because I know I definitely want to spend some time on what you do at OU. I want to go back a little further. What was a favorite game for you growing up?
So my one of my most iconic games I'll always reference is Mega Man, and for several reasons.
Okay.
So Mega Man was my introduction to EDM. I don't care what anyone says. Mega Man is 8-bit EDM. And I reference it as my classical music often, and that's why I have a Crimson Mega Man right on my shelf.
Nice.
And the thing with Mega Man is that the instruction style of how to play the game is still almost perfect, because it doesn't have any tutorials, it doesn't have any guides of how to play the game. It just shows you small little animated cutscenes of what Mega Man's doing, and then you're like, wait a minute, let me explore how he did that. Maybe I can do that too. And through that, it actually teaches you to critically think and apply what you, as a visual learner, how to utilize Mega Man and slide his power up, shooting lemons, as we'll call it, out of his cannon, and all in between. So Mega Man was iconic to not only developmental, but also entertainment. I was the little nerd that would take my little Sony Walkman with a mic and hold it up to the TV and record the soundtracks off of it. And at nighttime, that soundtrack would be the theme songs to my imagination.
Right. Those are the days of waiting for your favorite song to play on the radio or recording off the TV so you could re-listen to it later on your boombox. Yep. It's amazing. So, okay, Mega Man, love it. I love it. Those were some amazing games. Have you played it since? Or you played like an emulator or like a Switch or something? I
definitely will stick truer to the canon of 1 through 10. And obviously the ones in the middle are, everybody's controversial on those, but 1, 2, and 3, especially 3 for me was iconic, whereas most people say 2 was for them. 3 for me was iconic, and then 10 was iconic more than anything.
Yeah.
And I did play all of them, but or Mega Man X rather, because
Yeah.
10
Right.
is a whole
Right.
different game. But but there was this iconic, because all I it became one of those things where I stopped playing it to beat the game, and I would play it just to go through all the levels, just to have the sounds and just listen to them.
Right.
As again, it became kind of my mental sanctuary to
Yeah.
hear 8-bit music like that.
Love it. So going from uh, gaming as a kid to being in the military to working with disenfranchised youth,
Mhm.
to doing tech, Apple, now at OU, starting this gaming club in 2017 as you became more of an esports association.
Yep.
Where did that take you? And I know 2019. I want to talk about your TED talk, but before
Yeah.
that, those 2 years before that, what was building? What was building in that time?
So there's two kind of tracks that I want to focus on how
Mm-hmm.
we structured OU, which is absolutely still in effect today. The first is I referenced my time being a gamer, and both my way of escaping reality and finding peace as an introvert, and my recharge time, my personal time, and then also the concept of using it as what we would call our golf time, our literal
Mm,
go, with other
yeah,
people or even by
yeah,
yourself, whatever. So both sides. One is a recovery mechanism, one
I
is
like
an
that.
entertainment mechanism. In the mid 2000s, when World of Warcraft was becoming a thing, I
Mm-hmm.
played the end of vanilla through Cataclysm,
Mm-hmm.
and
Same.
I ended up at the end of the 4 year sprint, a guild master and a raid leader,
Mm,
and it helped me start to really establish the power of leadership skills I had in myself that I didn't
amen.
realize I had.
Amen to that.
And trying to coordinate, like I still today can't think of most scenarios outside of gaming where you're trying to coordinate high stress, you know, goals and objectives
Yeah.
with the cast of people that are not from the same backgrounds or not from the same interest entirely in milliseconds of time through Ventrilo
Yep.
and TeamSpeak, back then. And so I really attribute that. But at the same time, you're building community. It's a digital community. And at the same time, as a guildmaster raid leader, you become everyone's psychologist, you become everyone's friend, you become,
Mm,
the conflict resolver. And again, these natural byproducts of just the human condition. Now you're invited into people's most intimate and sacred places, where they go to escape. It's their, their play family away from their real family or their work family. And so I attribute that as the golf time. We take it seriously. We see plenty of people that have their golf time. They take it absolutely serious. Don't
exactly.
bother me. Leave me alone.
Exactly.
And the beauty of it is the culture of it, the community that would form is that you'd have those people that were not interested in the end game at all. They wouldn't be interested in raiding, but they would still go out and harvest and mine and do the stuff to build resources for the teams that were going to
Mm-hmm.
raid that
Mm-hmm.
night. You had that was literally the
Wow.
moms of the guild. They
Yeah.
would go
Right.
do that because they couldn't commit because they had parental responsibilities, but that was their contribution to feel a part of the team,
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
part of the community, a part of the guild. And I'll never forget this. At the end of it, the last year, we had a couple that met each other in game and they got married.
Love
And before they physically got married, I married them in Dalaran, in the courtyard of Dalaran.
it.
And then a bulk of the guild, almost 40 people, flew from all over the area to Oklahoma City for a WoW BQ, as we'll call it,
Uh-huh.
and they married in person.
That is really
And
great.
my favorite thing about this is a story that when most people look at it, be like, that's really weird. Now it's like, man, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
And the picture from it, which I have misplaced, and I know it's somewhere in my attic. I need to figure it out. But this picture is this perfect representation of what gaming should look like. Whereas I have people from the guild that I had no idea when we played were handicapped. They did not have the use of their legs.
Sure.
They're in wheelchairs.
Sure.
To black, white, red, yellow, purple,
Mm-hmm.
you name it, under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Gender representation, white collar, blue collar, minors, adults, parents, singles, all of it was there, and it wasn't intentionally put there. It was just what organically came together, through the magnetism of playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
And that set the tone a lot for the empowerment of what I wanted to build for OU, which was community comes first. I'm not interested in starting competitive energies until there is a healthy culture on campus, which will serve its purpose of feeding those teams, of feeding development, of also instilling a culture that is not dismissive of women, is not having more toxic undertones in game, that is protecting itself and understands the power of what community symbolizes, with esports and the competition being a byproduct of it, not the other way around. So that's that first year, 2017, was about instilling that culture of a little bit of micromanagement and saying, guys, you got to be a little bit less aggressive with how you're using memes because it is
Mm-hmm.
dismissive to this specific demographic.
Wow.
And also taking into account the policies of the university, the evolving landscape of academia, but also the evolving landscape of the pro sector. So what we built and what we were starting to structure was based on a 3-point compass, as I'll call it, The first one was, what do students want to do? I'm not interested in trying to make students do anything because good luck, you will fail. So if we know that League of Legends is popular in collegiate and I don't have students that are interested in League of Legends, I'm not doing League of Legends just because everyone else is doing it.
Sure.
Because that would be just like pulling hair. You can barely get students to read emails in the first place. So if you can find students that are willing to champion the development of that infrastructure with you as an extension of the foundation you've built, now you're starting to build equity in the future professionals that you'll need to employ and the industry needs. So already had the curricular approach from the very beginning. So every single pillar, every single team, everything that we have done came from, and I don't know why my camera died there. Everything that we did came from the initiative of student passion and student interest. So it became organic. It became part of the culture. It became something that they were already kind of thinking and feeling and doing. And then the second one was, what was the university doing? And if my camera cuts out, I'm really sorry, Bubba.
Okay.
But the second part was, what is the university's policies? What are the student handbook? What's the rule book? What's the rule sets? What's the compliance concerns? And building our initial constitutions and things based on that. And then the third is, what is the pro scene doing? What is Evil Geniuses hiring? What's their org chart look like? What's their job titles? What are their functions? Because that's the path to industry versus the path to pro, which has a higher percentage chance of impacting more students than the ideology of thinking that they can go through college and have a pretty well-established pathway to pro in competition. That's just not happened. It still hasn't fully realized. We have some executors that are able to produce that kind of result, but that's the lower percentage versus interns going into marketing roles or production roles or TO roles or community engagement roles.
So, okay. I don't know if people realize that, parents and spouses out there, they definitely would probably appreciate more the analogy of golf time. I don't think I've used that with my wife yet, but I know that's going to be able to get me a little more game time. But you're exactly right. Yeah, I mean, all of COVID, we spent playing Warzone because we couldn't meet up and we connected. And you're right. Now, if you're out there, if you're taking notes, you're getting some of the best information about how to be a college director and coach here from Moog. And man, please, if you have this right now and you're watching, please send it to other people because this is some golden nuggets of information. Now, 2017, and for about 5 years now, 5.5 years, you've been doing curricular stuff. You said as well.
Right.
It sounded like, which is great. The wonder I have is the TED Talk. How did that come about? What was the
how'd you get invited? Before I go there, Bubba, I'm gonna stop fighting with my camera.
Okay, sure.
Put that placeholder up me.
Yeah.
And we'll just move on. But
sure.
So the TED Talk. This is when I was starting to gain momentum. So TED Talk was 2019.
Yeah.
2018 was probably the first major milestone year of this development. And what was significant is in, again, November 2018, we got the first departmental endorsement under OUIT, which then on paper allocates 20% of my time for the development of this program.
Okay.
So it's not a stipend, it's not an increase. It's just saying that now 20% of the FTE that is allocated for IT functions, which I support the Honors College through Central IT specifically, was now allowable to be used for esports development. So at the same time, there was a call to action for interesting topics that could be looked at as innovative or progressive and out of our innovation hub on the southern tip campus and research campus. And I was encouraged to present. And again, this is the time where I'm still pretty introverted. I wouldn't call myself super high functioning yet. And this is when that all changed.
Okay.
So during that TED Talk, the idea is I was really tired already, and I still am tired of seeing a lot of universities, and this isn't all universities. Let me blanket this. Let me specifically target the bigger universities, the universities that have 10,000 plus students.
Okay.
The students that have you have the university campuses that have high impact opportunities. And only doing intercollegiate esports where you have an Overwatch team, you only have 6 students. Well, what are you doing with the other 9,994 students on your campus?
Wow. Yeah.
And I wanted to paint a picture of saying, guys, this is one of those opportunities in higher ed where we have the perfect playground. We have resources on campus. If you have an engineering school, you already have a computer lab. You build a relationship with the College of Engineering. That lab can easily run Overwatch, League of Legends. It can run a lot of stuff. Maybe not the COD, maybe not the, but it can run Valorant, CSGO. It can do a lot without having to spend a single dime. And the benefit is that the majority of our campuses that do have engineering and STEM tracks typically have labs like that for CAD design or things like that that are more than just 10 machines. So then we start talking about going back to that compass of programming. When we talk about the pro sector, well, there's always a director of production. There's always shoutcasters, and who is creating them? For the most part, it's mostly a grassroots self initiative to get into that space and build that expertise. But we do that already in our sports broadcast divisions of universities that do anything that's live production.
Yeah.
So it's culturally, at least from a technique standpoint, very, very similar. It's just the game that's being played and the demographics being catered to is different. But the technique, overlays, infographics, scene switching, multicam is exactly the same techniques.
Right.
So drawing back to the idea of universities and institutions of higher learning having all these resources on campus, it needs somebody to be that nervous system, that glue, that's willing to go and knock on those doors and say, I'm teaching your curriculum without you, and here's an opportunity to further add value to your degree plans, which also adds resources to me as a growing program. And instead of building something that's on the surface of the university, it is now part of the nervous system that makes it run in the first, just like anything else. So infrastructure is what that was all about, in showcasing the ability that if this plays out, if you're not spending time building community, well, who's the fan base of your teams?
Yes.
If you don't, if you're not spending the time building your fan base, where are you getting your funding? Because for D1s, we don't rely on central funding. We go and we raise our own money more than anything. That's our sponsors, our corporate sponsors, our donors, our alum. Whereas the smaller schools, which have less red tape, or have more agility, can get more central funding allocation because they are able to just shift their buckets around so much easier because they're just not as big and fat and slow as these bigger universities. So if I can add different revenue stream opportunities, so now I have a streaming component, that's a revenue stream opportunity. Teams now, because I've petitioned for having the logo since 2018 at that pinnacle moment. Now I have a jersey, the only licensed jersey on the University of Oklahoma's face that can sell logo placement with the OU interlocking logo. So you can't do that in football, basketball, soccer, or any of those other ones. That's an amazing, bargaining chip when it comes to sponsorship. So television station, merch. Obviously, when we get to the venue state, we'll have, a namesake opportunity as well. Scholarships have a namesake opportunity. The whole department is even a namesake opportunity, which is how some D1 programs go. It's the Gaylord College of Communications and Journalism for us, kind of things like that. So that TED Talk was really focused on saying, this isn't how you should be doing it, but you should at least be looking past just playing games and looking at the business intentionality of building your revenue streams, building these things. The whole reason everyone's kind of, obviously is really upset with OU in the Big 12 is obviously we're moving to the SEC. And there's several factors to that. And a lot of it comes down to that production and sustainment of revenue and growth and the exposure of that for NIL deals to stay competitive for recruiting. So the cultural components of it, sure, I get why everyone's upset. But from the business standpoint, you take the emotion out of it. Come on, you got to at least say, okay, I understand a little bit of it. But those are the things that as I moved into this position, as we continue the timeline, that with that infrastructure in place and that intentionality, have multiple facets of activating from different areas. This last Sunday, the production division did the full live stream production for one of our cultural pageants on campus. So there's convergence even outside of the world of esports because it's the same techniques. It's the same styles of things with a camera and being able to moderate a community and do scene switching and graphic overlays. It's just modern day production broadcast production. So that TED Talk was really aimed at just trying to inspire the entire industry of higher education of saying, just look under every rock across your campus. Don't just say, here's the low-hanging fruit of kids wanting to play video games or young adults wanting to play video games and represent the university. Yes, that's a big component. Yes, it can be the main focal point, but there's so many other opportunities to do with this if you actually are watching the industry. We see, an entity like Valkyrie who now owns a portion of 100 Thieves, and she's an influencer.
Right.
So what's the techniques in being an influencer? It's still production. It's still brand management, marketing, advertising, all that's there. What I can't teach you is the charisma, but if I can teach you all the technique, you can focus on the development of your personal brand and charisma and persona. So there's so much that can be applied to a curricular approach. And the biggest kind of the whole real purpose of that, the underlying message that should have is that higher education has the word education in it. And the minute that we
Mm.
forget that that's part of the mission of why we exist in the first place, then you might as well
Right.
just go build
Right.
a grassroots professional organization.
Yes, yes. Esports in colleges is definitely not only competition. We definitely need to keep beating that drum. And you know, this last week I posted about a video I found of a guy saying esports business degree is useless, but he also showed a degree that was basically the predatorial slapping an E on a communications class and calling it a major because you talked about esports a little bit.
Right.
So they're out there. But what you're doing in the curricular space, when you have there's other schools. So like Jeff up at Oklahoma City University, and what he's doing there, he took his lab, his computer and design lab, and he's got esports in it now, and done some stuff there. When you're talking to other colleges, or maybe these colleges are reaching out to you, I'm pretty sure, asking you advice. What are you walking them through besides the stuff you just said? What are some steps that these colleges can take in order to become as successful as you are in both the academic and the competitive side of gaming and esports?
I think the biggest one, and this is the blanket statement that's kind of evolved over time, is that the first thing to note is that there is no cookie cutter design, and that is both scary and empowering. It's scary because in a world of everything that just gets rebranded and regurgitated here and there, it is a challenge to genuinely be unique. Not that you should intentionally try to be unique, but just generally innovative.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is that most people are fixating on low hanging fruit. And low hanging fruit, I hate the buzzword, but it is a buzzword, in business and so forth. It's just attacking the stuff that you think that this can be done really quickly, which is let's build a competitive team to represent our university. End of strategy. But you're not fueling into recruitment. You're not fueling into sustainment of scholarship dollars long term. You're not fueling into student integration into campus. You're basically creating an elitist infrastructure within the walls of your university instead of the power of inclusion that gaming represents when you built it from that way to the other.
Yes.
So when we talk about curriculum specifically, I am personally a fan of taking degrees that already exist. And the reason for that, as I mentioned, I have a degree that's called creative media production. And inside of that degree, we teach broadcast standards. We teach lighting, we teach audio, we teach streaming, we teach studio, and we teach, panel switching and everything, black magic tools. All of it is taught. Yeah. The only part that's missing is OBS, slobs, vMix, and Twitch.
Right.
So if you add elective courses to that pre-existing infrastructure, you've just added value to a pre-existing degree plan that already has decades of alumni support and is already built within an infrastructure that's been here longer than any of us have been alive.
You're right. That's what's missing is these courses within that are taught and brought in experts to teach those things. Or, gosh, because literally that's why we struggle with this in this space, in the college space, is there's colleges that do that, but they don't do it right. They do it with the idea of saying, we're going to Google what esports is and add it into part of our curriculum. And then that's where it's not helpful.
Right. So
go ahead.
We also see certificate programs and then full degree structures. And I'm not against any of these structures. It makes sense for which college. Because if I'm at a smaller university that doesn't have something like what I just mentioned in CMP, because of the size of a D1 campus at OU, then sure, a degree structure from the ground up is okay if you intentionally build it referencing what you just said, bringing in the professionals that know and bringing in faculty that can speak to it, which are few and far between. It's still such an infantile topic when we talk about trying to build esports curriculum from the ground up, because most of those people that would be the experts in here are still the industry executors, and they're not coming to get paid what you pay professors in academia, not even as a stipend. They don't have enough time in the day. So it's really about understanding your university's culture and its capability, and then strategizing what makes the most sense for your brand. For me, I don't want to create degree structures from scratch, at least not in the next 3 to 5 years. I want to augment pre-existing degrees because of that infrastructure that's already in place. And that allows me to tap into more degrees. So while I might just go into CMP with an emphasis in esports media, that's one track. What about business or sports business with an emphasis on esports analytics or esports, that track, instead of just recreating a business degree from scratch? I could go into anthropology that has emphasis on the study of digital communities. We
Yeah.
could go into sociology for the same reason. Social work, which speaks to the time I had in the juvenile facility,
Yeah.
talking about the very real narrative in society about defund the police, which I hate that word. It should be restructure the police, using gaming as a preventative tool, keeping
Mm.
youth on the right
Mm.
path or corrective path.
I feel like I'm in
So
church here, man. This is
yeah,
great.
so these are all things that you can logically connect ties into, that already exist on some of these campuses, depending on again
Yeah.
your size and intentionality and structure. But when you apply it that way, it becomes impactful. It adds value to pre-existing things, and even recently separated alum now gain more value in the investment that they have already completed in themselves, and will also be willing to come back and support these programs as they continue to innovate and be progressive and stay with the times versus, oh look, YouTube just dropped, okay, we'll finally teach it 4 years later,
Mhm.
staying on top of things and that, because if I'm doing production for pageants on campus, and what's stopping me from doing production for the football game itself?
Exactly. Exactly. I love it, man. This is great. I like I said, folks, if you're out there, take notes, because OU's doing it right, and because of Mike. Um, let's talk about college esports overall. We
Yeah.
talked about the curriculum side, and I definitely love that side. I don't know if you know, but I've been teaching for 8 years in higher ed as well, but
Mhm.
mostly in the traditional sports. And I get asked to teach esports stuff. I say stuff because that's about their
Right.
extensive knowledge of what I do outside of the university I teach at, up here in Kansas City. And when we talk about the competitive space, um, the the as it's always referred to as the Wild West and
Yeah.
the space race, as some people has been calling it, and we've used those terms Wild West way too much. And I think, as you mentioned before we got live, just doing a normal, having the same conversations like we did in 2020. I really
Mhm.
appreciated your perspective on that. Um, trying to solve college esports segmentation and uh, just the disconnect and the best practices and the consistency. Where are we doing it right? Where do we need to improve? Are there is the, I know there's no silver bullet,
Yeah.
but what from your perspective and your expertise, what are some steps we can take?
So the need for governance is a real thing. And the problem is that there's certain things that people love to hate. If we talk about like Microsoft,
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft versus Apple as a pop culture icon, everyone will pick Apple over Microsoft for the most part. The same thing would go if you talk about the NCAA. Now, I'm not a fan of the NCAA and the topic of esports. However, the need of governance doesn't excuse the word NCAA as a referenceable entity. So the need for governance
Sure.
is absolutely it. And the problem is that while most of this can be structured very similarly, the one problem and wrench in the system
Yeah.
is protected IP, the developer's protected
Mm.
IP. And it's a big one. I mean, that's completely it. So you've obviously seen, all over the place when we talk about K through 12 and what's going on with like Play versus HSCL versus the grassroots TOs and stuff like this. That's an argument. It's all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Then we start talking about the collegiate sector where you have Riot and Blizzard kind of doing their own controlled IP launches and stuff like this, which is okay. You see Epic saying, we don't care, just do Rocket League tournaments, with Sonics. And now with Fortnite even coming into saying, yeah, just go do whatever you want, basically.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely all over the place. My biggest thing is that a lot of us are really trying to, it seems like many of us are trying to think that we've already made it to any kind of finish line.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
the reality here is that if you have that mentality, that's when you start to actually lose your agility and your vitality, because this is kind of one of those industries where we have to think about a time before football existed, when students from, what was it, Princeton and Rutgers, or Harvard, I can't remember, Princeton and Rutgers, I think it was, came together on a grass field and said, you know what if we charge admission to this? And now you have the football. That was, over 100 years ago. But it started from a new student initiative. Whereas in this
Wow.
scenario, we have to reverse engineer that kind of
Mm-hmm.
structure. We don't get that traditional pipeline because the pro sector and the grassroots sector just skipped right over us because we're slow and antiquated in the context of being agile for innovation and progressive thought. So in that same mindset, we also have to take our time to vet what does make sense,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not, this is one of those things where when I say it, sometimes it becomes a polarizing argument, but there's other reality. And again, we need to make sure that we're being mindful of history and what history has taught us through different things. we can reference the birth of the NCAA. We can reference the birth of the conferences and the Power Five distinctions. We can reference iconic shifts in all those, going from like the Big 8 to the Big 10 to the Big 12. We can reference all these different milestones along the way.
Yeah.
And even so, we have a massive, disarray in, for instance, the Big 12 Athletics Conference. Bob Bowlesby just said that he's basically stepping down after all that, but we won't go into that. The point is that these are iconic moments as we continue to shape the face of conference level football play or athletics play.
Right.
In the esports sector, the same thing is happening. It's just that we don't have the brand power that you would have with a Big 12 a conference or a Big 10 or ACC or Pac-12 or any of those with the Power 5 distinctions, and even below, even a tier below that with the Peach Belt and Mid Atlantic and so forth. And so that's the significance of what a NACE represents, or an EGF, or any of these kind of tournament organizers that are more conference structured instead of a singular title. They're doing it. We kind of seeing EFUs kind of take that shape after acquiring College COD and College Cardball Association, kind of setting themselves up to potentially they could make that move. And for the most part, College COD is, regardless of COD itself, is run very, very well. So this is the thing, is that there's this topic is too dynamic. There's too many variables for us to be thinking about finish lines right now. The idea is that you should be challenging the stuff that doesn't feel ethical. You should be bringing up the questions when you have a concern. You should be trying new things at every corner and every new season to get to the point where you are satisfying the bigger percentage of the audience you're trying to cater to. Nothing will be perfect at the very beginning. I found out I got a little bit of flack because Oklahoma, as a state, sanctioned at their level, at their governance level, sanctioned esports across schools last semester. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side of the fence you're on, most people I think would be unfortunate, they decided to outsource it. Of course, they decided to outsource it exclusively to Play Versus. Now, my feedback to them was, I think people interpreted me as saying that I was a fan of Play Versus, when in reality, I was a fan of OSA doing something.
Yes.
Doing something. Because nothing in my timeline was created overnight or even in a single school year. It was on average a 3-year cycle. So if OSA didn't start then, we would be waiting about 3 years from whenever they did get started. And nothing is perfect in its first iteration. I don't care who you are, what TO you are, what brand you are, anything. There's tons of evolution that happens in that first 3 years before you stabilize.
Well, Well, I just say I met with David Jackson back in 2019. And it was funny because I presented high school esports to their whole staff, and it was just because I got invited to come speak about something, and it was funny because their office is literally a mile from my house where I grew up, there on Broadway Extension, and his question at that time was, "What game do we sanction?" He said, "All of them. I mean, you don't just sanction, shot put in track and field.
Yeah.
You got to sanction all of them." So, that is a struggle. I understand. It is, the word "unfortunate" is the right term there, and I feel for you on that because it's everywhere, sadly. But yeah, continue on with the high school space.
Yeah. So in that same space, the point is that OSA at some point will have to listen to the people on the ground, the people doing the work, and they had to get started somewhere. Ideally, should they have started this way? No, but it did happen. It's irreversible. It's now the past. Get over it, and let's move forward to start working towards what we want. Because now that they've cared, they have now opened Pandora's box on themselves by saying that as OSA, as an organization, is sanctioning esports, and now they have a responsibility because they're officially at the seat of the table. So those are the things that I was fixating on and highlighting, because that's infrastructure.
Yeah.
And the narrative of limiting exclusive esports in the youth, I obviously also have a very similar take from most of my peers in the space. But again, it's not a black and white topic. Let's go down one more level. If we talk about high school football or high school soccer, or high school soccer, let's talk about high school soccer specifically. And I played soccer. I was all state Oklahoma, and my
year did you graduate?
Played as well. 2000.
So did I. So we might have played each other. I graduated in 2000. I played soccer. Oh my goodness, we didn't even know. We
Full
probably
yeah.
Anyway,
so in soccer, in traditional high school, you have varsity JV structure, but then you have your classic and clubs on the side.
Yes.
that have nothing to do with the
Yes.
schools.
Yes.
And it's typically the clubs and the classic structures that go into Olympic development programs,
Mm-hmm.
not the schools.
Correct.
So that infrastructure already exists. And that's why I struggle myself to
Mm.
understand how local TOs and local government agencies also don't see how there is a place for both to live in harmony. Because being sanctioned by a state level also requires more governance, more control, and less flexibility. But it legitimizes it because it allows the lowest common denominator in socioeconomic status schools to also be able to participate at the same tier as the highest socioeconomic status schools because it's
Yes.
regulated as a state function.
Yeah. Yeah.
That infrastructure is critical. Play
Right.
versus is not necessarily conducive to that because of the seat per license. However, I'm not talking about play versus. I'm talking about OSA and the future and how it structures the rest
Sure.
of its leagues.
Sure. Well,
So knowing that that's the path of what OSA will eventually lead to makes me okay with it. Because if OSA had come out and said that students that are in official high school and middle school school programs in the state of Oklahoma
mm-hmm.
can only play under that banner in OSA sanctioned stuff like they do with football, soccer, and everything else, then yes, my tone would be very different. But they didn't do that because they knew they had to learn too.
Mm.
That's literally that's what that it says. It says we
Yeah.
don't know what we're doing. We outsourced all of it, but we know we have to get started.
Right.
And
Well.
getting started, that starts that timeline.
Uh-huh.
But the other leagues and others in states,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the state, they can function as that club, classic type functionality, which is better because the schools are already inspiring the involvement in this at the school level now because it's institutionally supported. So the clubs would then be free, just like traditional like soccer structures, to play on those teams. You have to pay to enter. They're not cheap, but they provide you additional resources outside of the school structures. There is a place for both,
Yes. Well, yeah.
and they
I
make
mean,
perfect sense.
the the club soccer that you mentioned.
Yeah.
I've been a referee for years for club soccer, and that's under the United States Soccer Federation.
Yep.
And that's where you pay your dues as a player and a coach, and that's where you, as a referee, I get my training, and insurance falls under there. But it's like you said, it's separate from the school, the school sanctioned sports, and they both live together. You're exactly right, and yeah, why are we not taking cues from that? I don't know.
Right. Right. But
Even
that's the solution. That is a
mm-hmm,
potential solution to this kind of struggle
mm-hmm,
infrastructure for K through 12. In the college sectors, it's definitely harder because you do have this giant, slow but takes up a ton of real estate D1 Power Five like an OU or a UCLA or a UT or a Oklahoma State.
mm-hmm,
And then you do have the smaller schools that are more agile, just as impactful, if not more impactful, and oftentimes more impactful at this current state. And I'll reference clerkly at Maryville as an example. Um,
yeah, yeah,
Very, very high intensity, making absolute impacts into the space. But the other thing too is that we all have different things that we cater to. For me as a D1 Power
mm-hmm,
5 with 24,000 undergrads on the surface of our campuses, plus an additional 5 to 6 staffing and faculty across all 3 universities, and then we start factoring in graduate and doctoral programs. Now we're pushing 30,000 students, so about 40,000 people that, as an initiative and extension of an official directorship at the university, I'm not catering to 8 students in a development
mm-hmm,
program.
mm-hmm.
I'm catering to a university of 40,000. So if I have to build programming, which I do by job description, build options for them to be involved for all 40,000 of them, we do not have the same objectives, metrics, and deliverables. And that's why you can't grade them all the same. And this depends on where that entity is housed. If it's housed in student affairs, that tends to be closer
Right.
to the narrative that you'll get. If you're housed in athletics, though, no, you definitely more are the competitive energy directed, not exclusively, but the higher percentage of us will fall in those 2 buckets, and that tends to be the scope. But it's the same thing in student affairs or student divisions on campuses. You typically have like your fitness and rec divisions.
Mm-hmm.
And what's fitness and rec's job? To run the gyms on campus,
Mm-hmm.
but also to facilitate intramurals
Exactly.
for staff and faculty engagement
Yeah.
outside of the athletics infrastructure.
Right.
And this applies to that too. So like there's tons of convergence about integrating into the pre-existing structures of the university and what they care about, while also pioneering and developing new outfacing developments like what the esports portion of it signifies.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also why I had such an emphasis on community in the very beginning, because
Yeah.
it was being sensitive to the university I was developing at and thinking about the topic through my own experiences and what it's given me as an individual through community of how I could impact 40,000 lives instead of 6.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, how does recruitment work for you then? Are you working with somebody like Todd Borland at the Oklahoma Esports League, or are you out of state? What are you finding students on DMs? What's how
All
does
the
recruitment work for
kind of
you?
all the above. So
Mm-hmm.
like this last weekend, we were in Durant for
Oh,
Choctaw
right.
Nation's first official Atoka ISD Overwatch and Smash Invitational,
Mm-hmm.
and we had already been talking to students. And granted, this is one of the blessings of being at a university where at least 50% of it has crimson somewhere on its body or in its house.
Mm-hmm.
And so naturally, in the state of Oklahoma, any high school graduate that's looking about going to college is at least has an OU or an Oklahoma State on their top 10 list,
Mm-hmm.
because in-state tuition is a big discount in
Mm-hmm.
comparison to out-of-state. So there's a lot of DMs and emails that we get throughout the year. I think on average, I am now averaging anywhere from 8 to 20 a month of just cold call emails coming to
Sure.
us instead of us headhunting.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, we are typically, based on the last survey I did, we only um, and really quickly, we actually have 6 pillars of intentionality and
Oh, please.
development,
Yeah.
and intercollegiate esports is only one of them. So
Okay.
the other 5 are production and shoutcasting, streaming entertainment, so influencers,
Mm-hmm.
news and media journalists for event coverage and advocacy, community, which is basically our TOs and our event coordinators, and then the leadership, which is the head of the other 5 pillars. And all 6 pillars are scholarship enabled.
Really?
So I recruit
Wow.
influencers. So I scholarship influencers now. I
Mm-hmm.
scholarship
Okay.
production and shoutcasters to speak to the very things that I was telling everyone I was building in that TED Talk.
Yeah.
And so we should have our first shoutcast recruit coming in from Texas, which is coming to OU on a scholarship for shoutcasting. So that's
So great.
yeah. And so again, to showcase what we need in infrastructure support to build it so that it's here to stay. And we see it all the time. We're seeing it much better. One, the diversity of representation
Mm-hmm.
for talents that are being produced or that are showed for any event. Here's the talent lineup for this event: shoutcasters and production people. Well, if we're highlighting them, just like we're highlighting competitors,
Mm-hmm.
that's a job in the industry. So treat it as such, because it's a skill
Exactly.
set and it takes
Exactly.
time to practice it, just like competing. Even more so, because not only do you have to know the meta of the game strategies and intricacies, you also have to be
Yes.
able to articulate it,
Yep.
time it, use emotional draw, and understand narrative history and all that to be a good engaging caster. So we also recruit. We've had international recruits actually this year. We actually had prospects from Japan and Holland,
Great.
who actually did apply to OU, but because my scholarships are still not quite up to par, or not very strong, and I'll admit that they're definitely not strong as a year one, would not offset the cost of attending OU as an international student. Just wouldn't, and I don't fault them. But the fact is,
Yeah.
they applied in our system. I didn't apply them; they applied. So they are absolutely within the trackable metrics that I can use at OU in an admissions and recruitment department to say we are absolutely globally
Yeah.
recruiting now.
So.
So on average, the last part I'll make, on
Mhm.
average, the roster of recruits that we typically have in either commitment or currently prospects usually is on average between 30 to 50 students every month.
So how does the colleges out there that I know that are giving scholarships to audio video or tech or shoutcasting? There's a few
Mhm.
out there that are doing it, but they're doing it from their esports competitive budget for
Yep.
their players. So I see that, and most of them are NAIA, and honestly, they're given tuition discounts and they're tagging with academic scholarships,
Mhm.
and doing an academic discount as well, based on their ACTs. How how under is it a vertical that you have with all those you called it pillars? I can't remember the term you used.
Yeah.
You're in,
Yeah. Pillars.
yeah. Is that all under the esports division? Under is it, that's a school of IT or something, right? You said or
No, so
it's
now it's all its own department. It is a
there we
full-fledged
go.
department, just like athletics.
There we
Yep.
go. So
And
it's
that's
called
that's
esports.
It's the
The,
University of Oklahoma Esports and Co-curricular
that's
Innovation Department within the Division of Student Affairs.
student affairs. Okay, so okay. Now scholarship wise, so in that division,
Yeah.
uh, then you have those different pillars, and you have scholarships. Potentially, you're getting more. It sounds like to
Yes.
give scholarships to each one of those
Mhm.
pillars. Um, and where do you see the most success right now out of those pillars?
Of course, it's competition,
Mm-hmm.
because even for the youth, they have, and again, high school educators, even the well versed ones, still the concept of a scholarship and shoutcasting is still foreign, and
Mm-hmm.
especially the concept of a shoutcaster in influencers, because that one is just like, wait, what? yeah, if you know how to use TikTok and you know how to use Twitch and you
Hmm.
understand your own responsibility to your
Hmm.
brand and you can represent yourself, how is that any different than slapping 100 thieves on an influencer and helping them advocate for your brand? It's the exact same structure. Just copied it inside of a D1.
Yeah.
And so that allows me to now add more value to the university overall, because if the university's admissions department is only broadcasting on cable where kids aren't watching, the newspaper where kids aren't reading, and the radio where kids aren't listening, then how do you reach them?
Hmm.
You reach them in things like TikTok, which no one has time for, and you
Hmm.
reach them on things like live streaming platforms. So you
Hmm.
can use that as a means to offer scholarships and using influencer style media to recruit not just to esports, but to the collective of the university as a whole. And that's why the department isn't just OU esports, it's OU esports and co-curricular
Right.
innovation, because there's so much that we take for granted inside of the gaming cultures and communities and how we interact with technology that enables our way of life on a day-to-day basis. And if we extrapolate that out to just workforce in general, how much of it can impact a workforce at a desk or an infrastructure in it? How many communities are using Discord for team operations or class facilitation?
Yeah.
How many are doing, everybody was a panelist and moderator in the live stream over 2020 and 2021.
Right.
So there's so many convergences that transcend out of just the topic of gaming and esports that are byproducts culturally, especially that Gen Z use, that they don't identify it as anything special. It's just their way of work, a way of their life, their own productivity workflows. And so part of my job is to identify those things, basically package them so they can be taught and help elevate the productivity, interest, and brand power of the university as a whole.
I love it, man. I love it. This is great. I know you. I know you spend a lot of time, sharing this information, but this is the first time I've heard it in person,
Yeah.
and it's extremely honoring to be able to sit down with you and really learn this. And for me, as someone who I get to go and I get to go and regurgitate this a little bit and then talk about what you're doing. I won't do it justice, but I'll use some clips from this for sure.
Sure, sure.
And I think you're definitely leading this space, and we really need what you have and what you've been able to offer with your teams and with your teams, as in the people that work with you. And I appreciate you, man. This has been really, really educating and helpful, and especially this is why you're here. We want to give people the information. We want to give people the ability and the momentum and the motivation to do stuff like you're doing at
Right.
Oklahoma University.
Well, and that's the last note point I'll make,
Mm-hmm.
and that actually is a great way to close this out. So many of us are already in the mindset of competition, and the problem
Mm-hmm.
with that is that because we have not actually hit any actual finish lines, what are you actually competing for? Because we haven't defined that national
Yeah.
recognized tournament. We haven't defined that nationally recognized board to grade our programs. We haven't created enough infrastructure in that way to have accountability to each other in ethics, in behavior, in accountability of things. All that stuff matters, as we have seen plenty of students that have walked away from universities, especially young women, because of misconduct,
Mm-hmm.
and that just completely gets brushed under a rug. That's a real thing. It's
Mm.
still here. And those types of things, when we are at each other's throats or we're competing and we're looking at, oh, my doctrine is the different than yours, when you're my natural adversary and enemy now, the other reality is saying, hey, I'll make myself vulnerable to anybody's idea if you're willing to have a conversation, but you're going to also have to listen to mine. And then through
Yeah.
that, at least appreciate the different vantage points. I don't fault anyone in this space and whatever path they're taking, as long as it's ethical and in the mindset of creating opportunities for the very students that we are employed to help build for the society and industries of today and tomorrow. That's what our purpose is higher education. And when we lose that, then why are we building these things in higher education in the first place, or in education at all? They always need to have some kind of curricular element, some kind of direct development of young minds into voices who understand their own power and spotlight and take ownership of it for their own communities wherever they may land. That's the bigger picture to all of this, just like everything else we should be doing in education in general. And anyone that doesn't get that point needs to really reevaluate, in my opinion, what they're
Mm.
doing in this space, regardless of the esports word over my head. It's just education. I'm tired of hearing about higher education losing its value and only increasing debt. So I don't want to be a contributor to that. I'm going to
Wow.
work my butt off to fundraise and keep that money off the backs of students and on the front of future employers that need to invest in these programs that absolutely have STEM major tracks, oil and gas, mechanical engineering, aerospace, those types of things. Leveraging that instead of expecting my students to answer the call, and rather empowering to them to make the call themselves. And that I think is one of the biggest things that continues to rub me wrong in the space, where I see a lot of people going, pointing fingers at each other, this and that, instead of having active dialogue and debate, and then trying to pick a side or put some kind of rift in each other because they didn't quite understand what you were trying to say and you weren't willing to go back to try to learn more, or at least calling them out in the case that they are genuinely unethical in the space, because they do exist too. And keeping accountability. Right now, while we lack that governance infrastructure overall that we will continue to work towards, it's up to us to be that whistleblower, to be that gatekeeper, to be that advocate, when the compass is about impacting students directly and as much as we can, more than anything.
Thank you, Mike. This has been great. If you've watched, if you've listened, you need to rewatch this a couple times. I will. I've got a lot of notes that I'm going to be taking. I'm going to turn in some of this video into some nice, great digestible clips that will be more than just sound bites, but pieces of information that we can all take back to our own, to different colleges to really support the ecosystem.
Yep.
Mike, thank you so much. If you guys were here, this has been Mike Moog Aguilar, the Oklahoma University Director of Esports and Co-Curricular Innovation. Thank you so much for being here today, sir.
Yep, thank you for having me, and everyone, thank you for listening.
All right, sir. I'll catch up with you later. You are done. I'll see you. We'll catch up. We'll play some video games together, I'm sure.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks so much,
Bye,
Mike. See ya.
Okay.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. This is great. I like I said, learned a ton. If you are out there in the esports space or you're trying to be, please listen in, educate yourself. This show is all about educating, a little bit of that back to school feel where people can learn a little bit about esports, especially the college space and how the pipeline works, and having great guests like Moog coming in and just sharing some amazing knowledge. I've done a lot of interviews with college coaches over the last 2 years, and that by far has been one of the best transparent educational ones I've done. So thank you for that. And hey, this has been Back to School with Esports U. Just a reminder that the CECC is coming up soon. See you later.